All right, guys, welcome to Click On Weekly for October 23rd, 2013. Today we'll have Cal Lemming with us discussing some zero-day exploits that he's discovered. But before that, we just want to kick off a few news and notes real quick. Last week we released Free Switch 1.2.14. As you know, we'll be releasing 1.2.15 shortly to address some of those issues with guys that are having build issues on some of the latest variants of Debian, such as Jesse and Sid. If you're running those, we'll be fixing up the packaging for that shortly. So I'm not going to take too much time here because Cal's got some pretty interesting stuff to talk about today. So I'm going to go ahead and let him take it away. Cal? You with us, Cal?
Hey, right, can everyone hear me?
There we go.
Cool, sorry.
All right, guys, welcome to Click On Weekly for October 23rd, 2013.
Oh, Ken,
Today
you've
we'll
got
have
some
Cal
feedback
with us,
repeating back
discussing some zero-day exploits that he's discovered. But before that, we just want to kick off a few news and notes real quick. Last week we released Free Switch 1.2.14. As you know, we'll be releasing 1.2.15 shortly to address some of those issues with guys that are having build issues on some of the latest variants of Debian, such as Jesse and Sid. If you're running those, we'll be fixing up the packaging for that shortly. So I'm not going to take too much time here because Cal's got some pretty interesting stuff to talk about
Yeah,
today.
it's still feeding
So
back
go
over.
ahead and let him take it away. Cal?
Ken, I could.
You with us, Cal?
No, I can't even mute. Hey, right, can everyone hear me?
There we go.
Cool, sorry.
All right, guys, welcome to.
Okay, Ken, I think it sounds like it's fixed now. I think. We'll just give it a second.
Can you hear me now? 1.2.14. As you know, we'll be releasing 1.2.15 shortly to address some of those issues with guys that are having build issues on some of the latest variants.
Okay, cool. Right, I think that's the technical issues sorted. I hope so. Okay, yeah, thanks for the introduction there, Ken. If anyone has any problems hearing me, just shout me out on IRC. So, talk today is to go through the problems of auto-provisioning and why auto-provisioning sucks. So, first of all, disclaimer. Despite what you may read on Google, I'm not a security expert. I'm a programmer. I've done this disclosure the most responsible way possible, and as such, I'm not going to be disclosing any proof of concept code, but you can easily put it together. Okay, hold on. Ken, is it? I think people are still having problems on the YouTube feed.
You should be able to hear it okay, Cal. It was me feeding back YouTube right back into the bridge, so it's okay.
Oh, okay, cool.
Go ahead.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so let's move on. Okay, so picture the following scenario. Imagine you found a vulnerability that allows a malicious user to extract user credentials remotely with no authentication at all. Your supplier was shipping you these vulnerable devices as standard and as by default. Your provider refused, well, not refused, but basically didn't want to fix the problem. The vendors didn't fix the problem entirely. All of your customer base was affected. And on top of that, you were liable for any resulting toll fraud that came back from this, and you then had to explain that to your customers afterwards. Well, this is pretty much the bullshit I had to deal with in 2012, and is the main reason why I'm doing this presentation today. Now, the companies affected, Yearlink is the first one. This was disclosed to them in June 2012. It was patched, partly patched in August 2012, and the problem still exists. Now, I'll go into more detail later about how it still exists and why, because it can be argued, but it does still exist. SNOM is another one that was disclosed today by pure chance. I was just doing a final check on the slides, and I thought, I wonder if any of these other manufacturers are vulnerable. And it turns out they are also vulnerable, and a whole shit ton of others, but I didn't have enough time to do proof of concept code for all of them. I haven't put the name of the 2 providers that are vulnerable to this problem that I've been able to confirm against. One of them was disclosed in 2012, and they basically ignored me. All I can say, although I can't tell you the name of the company, what I can tell you is that they are QSA, have got QSA accreditation from ITSPA, which is pretty shocking, to be honest. So just bear that in mind, that even though someone's got good reputation and got certification and that kind of stuff, doesn't necessarily mean that they're the best company. Okay, so the known attack vectors. Oh, and I should just mention as well, this problem does exist on a significant amount of providers. The only reason I haven't mentioned more is because I just haven't had time to check all of them. So, known attack vectors. The first one is if anyone here isn't familiar with RPS, otherwise sometimes referred to as automatic provisioning, zero touch, have a Google of that first, have a look around, have a read. RPS is basically redirection services for auto provisioning. So a handset goes to an auto provision URL, that then goes points you to another URL, and you follow the chain down until you eventually hit your auto provisioning server. The second point of failure is the redirection service at the reseller. So the root authority is essentially the vendor. The reseller, they also then have a problem on their side as well, as a security issue on their side. And then you've got the final point, which is the providers, but that's basically any external facing provisioning system, and yeah, that's separate from the other 2. So in Yearlink, the v71 firmware it's meant to solve the problem, but it doesn't enforce it. The onus is still on the provider to make sure that it gets done properly, and you can still break the vulnerability on the v71 firmware. The v70 firmware, it's all enabled by default. There's no encryption, and the legacy services can't be disabled because of these firmwares. So yeah, there's nothing much you can do about those. The Yearlink firmware itself, to find this vulnerability, all you have to do is you can cut the firmware up. Given a bit of basic instruction on how to do that at the top. If you don't know how to do firmware cutting, then you probably shouldn't be doing it anyway. You will find the hints that I've given there. The most important thing to notice here is this prov.yearlink.co.uk. Right? This is basically the root authority of the auto provisioning service. All you have to do is put in any MAC address there, and it will point you to a URL, which then points you to another URL and follows down chain until you eventually hit the auto provisioning service. Now that may seem really simple, and you think, well, okay, why does this exist? And the answer is, I don't know why this has been left wide open like that. It's just ridiculous. You can see the query that's built up here if you look through the logs of the phone. The end result is you can write a scanner in 30 minutes that can extract the usernames and passwords of millions of phones within about a 7-day period. Single-threaded, single IP scan, you get 30 requests a second. You could quite easily do, use coroutines and, push it through proxies to get the request concurrency up a little bit, thus also bypassing any protections they may put in. And you could probably pull down the whole thing in about a day. Depending on the Depending on the auto-provisioning script you're hitting as well, if it's static files, then you can get much higher throughput. If it's dynamic files, i.e. going to a script first, then you're going to get a much lower throughput because most machines, most servers would just die under the load. 16,000 is at the moment the widest range, not taking into consideration of people using custom Macs. And I have tested this against a range which for my own customers, and it works. All of my customers were vulnerable to this, which is pretty disturbing. So moving on, the SNOM firmware. Again, you can cut it up using binwalk and JFFS. There's a couple of links there, really, really good links actually on how to do that, especially the reverse engineering the firmware primer. That was a particularly good read. If you have a look through firmware, you'll find some default URLs. This is also mentioned in documentation. You'll find model numbers and basically URL to hit and the pattern in which you need to hit it. The end result is you've got provisioning, the model number, then the MAC. Now, because the model number is in the MAC URL, you would think that, okay, that increases the entropy to, 10 times more, and it would increase the scan time, right? Wrong. It doesn't, because SNOM decided it would be a great idea to bind the MAC addresses to specific models. So that effectively has no protection at all. Again, you can easily write a scanner in 30 minutes. And this is an example of, if you look here, I don't know if you guys can see this because it's small text, but this is an example of such a scanner where you hit a MAC address and it gives you the endpoint, and then you go to the endpoint and so on and so forth. And I should just say as a disclaimer that I, of course, have not used any Macs which didn't belong to me, and if I did enter any Macs that didn't belong to me, then I wouldn't have gone and viewed the configuration. And I would advise everyone else who does this to also follow the same rules. Now, generic auto provisioning servers. The majority of auto provisioning servers do not have brute force protection. The majority of sysadmins don't bother checking the auto provisioning server logs, and I've confirmed that pretty much 100% as well. There's a significant number of well-known UK providers are vulnerable to this, and I don't just mean the small kind of 100, 200 customer base. I mean people that have got tens of thousands of customers. Again, one of which I reported this to, and they basically didn't care. So the other side of this is lol at 3CX. Anyone who's running a 3CX server should probably not use auto provisioning. I haven't written any proof of concept code for it yet, but by the looks of it, it's probably going to be pretty easy. Every handset is vulnerable to generic auto provisioning because it's just a flaw in the way that auto provisioning works, at least for handsets that don't support native encryption. And even those that do support native encryption, it's not enabled by default and it's not enforced by default or at all. I'm yet to encounter any provisioning server that isn't vulnerable to this. So yeah, and again, at least one big company I know is exposing thousands and thousands and thousands of customers to this problem. Now, dirty tricks. This is where it gets really cool. Scanner speed can be significantly increased using coroutines if you're familiar with Python. You can write really cool little libraries that wrap around free proxy sites where it pulls in the list of currently known proxies, hundreds and thousands of them, and it checks which ones are valid. It then uses those to push through the request throughput, thus bypassing as well some of the protections involved in IP and MAC binding for rate limiting, which, by the way, not a lot of providers do. I could have easily reached 1,000 requests per second with just a small amount of Python code. And I know I can because I've done it for previous projects where I needed to test DDoS attacks anyway. So That's 100%. The majority of servers will crash and burn. So if you're going to go in a wild and start doing this, well, first of all, you shouldn't do it against anyone unless you've got permission, obviously. But second of all, if it's your own systems, just be careful because you can knock out the server by doing that. And of course, I haven't implemented any of these as part of this presentation and as part of this proof of concept. The idea is that this is just going to be gaining awareness. I'm not looking to hand anyone any tools to go and make this easy for them. If someone wants to go and look into how to do this, here's all the information, go and write your own tools. Hopefully that will slow down, this getting into wild and so on and so forth. Now, immediate protections for non-encrypted configurations. These are really simple protections. Like any decent developer, programmer, sysadmin, DevOps guy, he would look at these and say, well, that's like that. This is really simple stuff. And I've mentioned this to several companies now, and they just don't seem to get it. They just don't see why this is relevant. So, for example, if you wanted to protect against mass scanning, you're not going to be able to 100% protect against it without the vendor's support. But what you can do is at least slow down brute force attacks. So if you rate limit based on MAC and IP combo, throw a layer 7 load balancer in the middle, whether it be using Nginx reverse proxy or ZXTM, and just do rate limiting on these different things. So on the MAC address and IP, checking user agents. If you're getting, for example, curl coming through or a non-standard user agent, then you're probably looking at a malicious user. Tracking IPs which access provisioning information, that's no different than tracking who's logging into an account. And for some reason, I think a lot of places seem to think that because it's happening behind the scenes, because we don't see it, it therefore doesn't need security. And that's the epitome of why I'm doing this talk today, to make people realize that you need to be thinking about this stuff. And again, a lot of these things are going to make things more difficult, yes, but they're things that should have been done in the first place. And you can remove and modify them on a case-by-case basis as well. So, but as a disclaimer, this only slows it down. It doesn't protect against targeted attacks. So if someone knows your MAC address and they know which provider you're with, and they haven't secured it and haven't got encryption, you're fucked. So, don't rely 100% on that. Now, for encrypted configurations, I haven't had a chance to review these firmwares yet. I believe Snom and Yearlink may or may not chime in with their 2 cents on this, but because I haven't had a chance to review it, I can't really offer any comment, but may follow up in the future. Out of the factory protection. Now, vendors are, despite the fact of putting in encryption, vendors are struggling to make phones secure out of the factory purely because it relies on the providers implementing this properly. If the provider doesn't use the correct type of configuration encryption, or doesn't use encryption at all, or uses a poor password, all these kind of things, then you're going to be screwed. Now, one of the ideas that I had was, well, why can you not create request validation using one-time use keys from a unique string, say the serial number or something else that's embedded into the device. Now, granted, that's not perfect, but this is part of something that's already well known. You've got the security modules where you've got keys built into them, like for example SIM cards, where you generate one-time use codes. This is the exact same scenario, and I again don't understand why it's been ignored. It's also worth mentioning that it's not just the Snom and Yearlink handsets that are vulnerable to this. Like, I don't think I found a single handset yet that isn't vulnerable in theory, although I'm yet to do proof of concept, obviously. And of course, if you've got ideas on how people can fix this and how the industry can fix this, share them. Get your thoughts out there, get your opinions out there, because realistically, until this is abused in the wild, then people are just going to do nothing. And the real important thing to remember here is that you, as a provider, as a provider's customer, are responsible for toll fraud. So if your customers get screwed over because of this, you're going to be footing the bill for a problem which they have effectively just passed on to you and ignored, which I don't think is fair at all. So how you can help. As I said before, many other vendors are vulnerable. I haven't got time to check them all. I wish I did. I haven't got the money and the hardware. Buying every single model and make of phone would cost several tens of thousands of pounds. So if you've got a phone that supports zero touch / auto provisioning, give it a try. Just try doing, for example, a simple PCAP on the phone during the boot up. See what kind of requests it's making. Best thing to look for is for HTTP and HTTPS requests. Look at the syslog. I actually found this problem because of looking through the syslog on the phone and saw that it was going to this URL. And I was like, what the fuck is this? And that's how I came across it. So it's by pure chance. So you don't have to go firmware cutting straight away. You don't have to know how to do firmware cutting even. You only need that if you want to go diving a bit deeper. And it is also worth mentioning that this is just the tip of the iceberg. When you go firmware cutting, there's a whole host of other issues. Now, again, most providers are not implementing encryption configuration by default, and that's probably not going to change anytime soon until it starts getting used in the wild. Yearlink, I've got to give credit to them. They are doing their best. They genuinely are trying to fix this, but it's still not enough. There's still something more that needs to be done about this. And again, something you can do, just test as many different makes and firmwares as possible, and just do what I've done today. Do a small a conference talk, or just throw it out there anonymously, or it doesn't even need to be a whole slide. It can just be a one page of this device is also vulnerable. This is how. Boom. So just spend some time if you can. And like I was saying earlier, auto provisioning flaws are really just the tip of the iceberg here. I was poking around, whilst I was looking at this stuff, and you'll be really shocked at what you can find, like obvious injection attacks and stuff like that to remote providers, and it's piss poor. It really is. It's really. I mean, I already had a hatred for other providers in the UK anyway, for the majority of them, and this has made me hate them even more. So, yeah, just take that into consideration, and vendors, of course. So it's not all doom and gloom. The very reason I discovered FreeSwitch was because I became fed up with incompetent developers and providers. I just couldn't put up with it anymore. Wasted significant amount of time and money. And as part of that, I've met some really cool people in the community, learned more in this last year than I ever would if I hadn't have found FreeSwitch. And it's also worth mentioning that there is one company, just one, that was already working towards protecting against this, and that's Kudatel. And that's obviously what they use FreeSwitch, and they basically ship the firmware with RPS turned off by default. So it's one step closer. You still have the auto provisioning servers to contend with, the generic failures behind auto provisioning, but it's worth mentioning. Acknowledgements. William King from Kudatel/FreeSwitch. He has been helping find ways to protect customers against this. Again, much appreciated for his advice on that. Ken Rice for organising the talk today and for getting the broadcast up and running. The FreeSwitch community in general, you guys are awesome. That's all I can say. Anyone whose URL I've linked to, there's some fantastic examples of firmware cutting and a couple of other things as well. And anyone who's taken time to write those up, as you saved me days worth of work on this. So I can't thank you enough on that. If you're worried about this, there are FreeSwitch consultants who can help you. Reach out to consulting@freeswitch.org. It will help keep the FreeSwitch community alive. It helps the core devs pay their bills, and it's doing a bit for the community. So if you're worried about it, feel free to reach out to them. And a couple of hints for you. So you'll have to obviously copy and paste these out afterwards once I put the slides up. But this is where I found known, or where I was able to figure out the vulnerabilities from to begin with. You'll notice Siemens is in there. That's one that you may want to look at. I didn't have time, but have fun with that. And yeah, there's some pretty shocking stuff in there. So if it looks like it's too good to be true, then it probably isn't. It probably is like real and stupid and just another developer thinking, "Oh, I can do this," without thinking about the consequences. So, and that's it. That's all I've got. So I hope I haven't wasted everyone's time here by talking about this. I hope you've all enjoyed it, and hopefully, this will have raised some awareness about the issue, and get some of the vendors and providers to start taking note. And I probably pissed off a couple of, well, at least one other company in the UK by disclosing this, but at the end of the day, people should be doing things properly. So, yep, that's all I've got. Thank you very much, guys. Oh, and of course, there'll be a Q&A session as well, so if anyone has any questions, feel free to post on IRC as well.
Thanks, Cal. I'm sure we've got some other people that want to ask questions here. And the question just came up on IRC about Cutatel and how they're doing that by default. Jairus, do you want to talk to that a little bit?
Sure. So Ulink does provide us custom firmwares, both bug fixes. Our QA team works very closely with them. William was on the phone with them well past 2 a.m. Eastern yesterday working on this particular issue. And one of the things in our custom firmware, as well as other bug fixes, is that RPS is disabled. There's never a reason for it, and we had concerns about it originally, so that's in there. Also, we kind of have bleeding edge bug fixes because our QA test plan tends to catch more things than theirs does. So we're a little bit ahead on getting VLF and SLA issues in particular fixed. We helped push through a lot of the race conditions in their 6.8, 6.9 series firmwares that were so problematic through with them, and gobs of issues, 50, 60 issues probably. As far as other companies, I don't think we have custom firmwares from any other vendors. William, correct me if I'm wrong. Or Ray. We do, for everything we provision, have fairly crafted configs that disable all kinds of things and lock things down. And then the other thing that helps us avoid situations like this is we give you firewall controls to keep you where you can limit where provisioning can come from on the outside world, so you don't have to open your provisioning URLs to the whole world and be scanned elsewhere. And from a best practices standpoint, at least for PBX stuff, I would strongly suggest the first line of defense is don't let people hit you at all, unless you know who they are. After there, I mean, obviously we need some sort of encryption approach to help solve this, and the only real way to do it starts with keys that are installed on the phones at manufacturing time, so that you can encrypt a specific config for a specific phone that only that phone will be able to decrypt. Do we have custom SNOM firmware? Did we ever have custom SNOM firmware? I mean, SNOM we used to work very closely with. We don't anymore.
I don't think we ever actually had custom firmwares for them. I know that at one point we had firmwares that weren't officially released on their site for doing IPv6 and things like that before they had it readily available, but we've never actually had a custom firmware in the Cutatel.
Most of the vendors that we work with, both on the FreeSwitch side and the Cutatel side, just push our bug fixes back to everyone. Ulink, just because of kind of how their build cycle works, and a few custom settings that we want have been giving us custom firmwares because we had specific feature sets that we wanted guaranteed work, and they were moving forward in other things, so they have given us custom.
So does anyone have any questions for the Coup-de-Tel team or for Cal right now? If you do, go ahead and ask on IRC, or hit 0 to request unmute on the bridge.
Well, before we get there, I kind of want to make sure that everyone understands what the nature of the issue was first. So, Cal, could you just back up a little bit and explain to everyone? Somebody needs to mute before we go any further.
Yeah, sure. So, what did you want me to explain?
That's what I was going for. I was just going to ask if you could explain how RPS works and the nature of how RPS exacerbated the problem that was kind of already out there.
Yeah, sure. So RPS was brought in specifically as a marketing tool, at least from what I can tell, to make it easier for providers to just ship a phone to a customer and not have to worry about typing in and provisioning manually and that kind of stuff. And from that perspective, it works great. The way that it works is you'll get, say, a hardware reseller who will be listed on the Yearlink root authority servers, and then you've got their customers who will tell them, okay, I want you to point this MAC address here and this MAC address here and so on and so forth. So it goes all the way down the chain, a bit like DNS, where you've got root authority DNS servers, and it goes down the chain until eventually you get the answer. And the reason that it's so flawed is it's not specifically a vulnerability within the redirection service. It's the flaw within the design, because what it allows you to do is narrow down the attack vector. So if you had to scan, say for example, 1,000 servers for 16 million MACs, then the amount of scan time is going to be astronomically high. But if you have a redirection server which can tell you which MAC is on which server, then you're reducing that attack time significantly. If you didn't have redirection, the problem is still there, but you have to know the endpoint URLs. And for that, you would have to use, say, I'm not going to say social engineering, but you would have to get demo accounts, you would have to get actual hardware, you would have to, and it would be a lot harder to collect this information. So it just makes it easier to attack it, but it's not the root cause of the problem. I hope that makes some sense.
Yeah, no, I think that's. I just wanted to make sure that got out there, because I think that's was the only thing that I thought missing from the presentation was kind of just giving a background on RPS and making sure everyone understood that the RPS is not exactly the problem. It's exacerbating a problem that's already there, and it is the problem from the standpoint that it doesn't try to address. It doesn't address the underlying issue, which is that you do need to do something like provisioning keys on the phone, or provisioning some sort of secret information on the phone at manufacturing, so that the provider can limit down to that phone and only allow that phone to get the provisioning information.
Yeah, agreed.
Did somebody have a question there? Do we want to unmute?
Yeah, let's unmute John and see what John's got here. Hey, John.
Well, thank you. Yes, so let me just, so if you provision internally on your own server and have a firewall, that blocks, I don't know, whatever port is required to do this, are you okay then, or?
Yeah, so if you've got a provisioning server that's internal, then the only risk, and it's not bound anywhere externally, then the only risk is if someone gets access to an internal machine. If your provisioning server is facing on the internet, though, then ultimately all you can do is, for the majority of phones, all you can do is slow down the attack. Some phones you can use encryption on, so but even then, it depends on the strength of your encryption key. But generally speaking, this is more people who are putting provisioning servers on the internet, these are the people that need to worry more. Those who are doing it internally, it would be good to think about these things from a good security practice standpoint, but I guess it wouldn't be as significant as being an internet-facing problem, if that makes sense.
But even if your server is facing the internet, how would they find the MAC addresses?
Well, that's so. Okay, what I'm going to do quick, I'm just going to pull up my screen. Ken, could you switch the screen over to me for a second?
Yep, there we go.
Okay, just bear with me for 1 second, guys. I'm going to show you a tiny snippet of code. Just give me a sec.
Well, anyway.
The one thing you got to keep in mind is the MAC addresses are assigned to a vendor, and that's a known list. And then all you have to do is figure out from there.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, I mean, the simplest way you can explain that is to say that you can narrow MAC addresses down to something on the order of 2 to the 16 for a particular vendor and a particular model.
I see.
And so you can then make 2 to the 10 requests per second, which means that it only takes you 2 to the 6 seconds to go through all of the space.
So basically, this
and 2 to the 6 seconds is only what, 64 seconds?
Yeah, but is that port is that a port that you normally, is normally open, like port 80 or something, or is that some funny port that you can close?
Oh no, the most of the provisioning servers work just off of HTTPS or HTTP. If they don't work that way, they work off of things like FTP, like Polycom, for instance, auto provision off of FTP or TFTP. And the only real way to protect those is with username and password. Well, what we're talking about here is zero comp from the provider, so those username and passwords would be able to, or pretty well documented. And,
I see. Okay.
And then, or either that, maybe it's a TFTP link, and TFTP. Trivial FTP has no user authentication whatsoever.
Password. Oh, I see. So, but if you do it yourself and just make sure that the ports are protected, or from the external, then you're pretty good. But if somebody's just had the phone out there, and then you can, I see what you mean. God.
Yeah.
Now, one of the additional problems with this RPS system is, even if you do have your own custom username and password for your secure HTTP server, the RPS system actually provides that to the phone. So somebody scanning this RPS database now has all the valid credentials for your devices that you've shipped, plus the URL with your protocol. Even if you run it on a non-standard port, it's all there.
Oh, great.
It's worth mentioning as well that building a scanner for this, I mean, this is basically a short piece of code that we'd use in Python to build a scanner for a MAC range. Anyone who knows Python will understand that pretty quickly, but the amount of code required to do something like this is so small, and you can find the MAC to provider mapping, MAC to vendor mappings anyway publicly, and like SNOM, for example, they even map a model to MAC address. So you don't even need to know the specific MAC address. All you need to have is enough throughput on both client side and server side in order to be able to brute force your way through the full MAC address list until you find the target you're looking for. I hope that makes a bit more sense.
Mel, can you send that SNOM model to MAC address mapping over to me? I hadn't realized that that's actually very useful.
Yeah, just give me 1 second. It's actually in it's in the slides. 1 second, somewhere.
Yeah, Mike, I've got to say.
You've got
okay,
it.
Here you go.
You've got it.
I've just put it in the channel for you. So for the sake of the video, this is what it looks like. So you can see all of the different MAC addresses there and stuff, which I think is quite amusing. But let's say, so go ahead.
How convenient.
Yeah, at first I thought, because they need the model number inside the URL, I thought, that kind of sucks. It's going to introduce more entropy and slow down the scan. But then I found this page and thought, oh, okay, cool.
Now, there have already been potentially some exploits to this out there, so anybody who believes they could be vulnerable will need to, one, regenerate all their SIP credentials for their clients, because anything that was accessible by these phones in remote provisioning could have already been compromised, as well as implement the secure provisioning on a per phone basis. So.
Yeah, I concur. If I personally think that if you're running an auto provisioning server at the moment, the best thing you could probably do immediately is to not run it. That'd be my personal view. I don't know how the vendors are going to react to this. I don't know if they're going to shut down the redirection servers or not. So just be careful and remember that you are going to be liable for any toll fraud that happens as of today or as of ever. Because this has, as William was saying there, this has been a known problem for a while amongst a small, subset of people. So, and others may have detected this and not mentioned it. I've been keeping an active eye on this for the past year to see if anything got out to the public, and so far I couldn't find anything on Google explaining this. So, but that's not to say that other people, haven't already been exploiting this. Think to yourself: Have you ever had a point where users come back and said, "Oh, I've got all these calls on my account. Maybe this was the root cause. Maybe something like this happened." If you've got logs, start looking through the logs. Start building up a list of who's accessed what and where and when, and that at the very least might be able to tell you whether or not this has been exploited. If you haven't got logs, then kind of sucks to be you. So a few bits of advice, but ultimately, if you want an immediate fix, and you're not too sure what to do, just reach out to the FreeSwitch team. The consulting at FreeSwitch, and there's plenty of professionals there that will be able to make sure that they'll reduce the attack vector for you.
Great, thanks, Cal. Any other questions for Cal? Either hit 0 to unmute yourself or ask away in the IRC channel. Or questions for Mike and the rest of the Coup-de-Tel team.
In response to the comment just there in the channel, the size of the search space does not make MAC address secure insecure. Anything that you can just loop through, no matter how big, is not secure. The only way to really secure this is if you have some sort of encryption that you can encrypt some sort of public-private key thing where the phone has the private, you have the public. You can encrypt it config just for that phone, and only the phone can read it.
Well,
anything else?
If the space was big enough, it would essentially be a key, right? I mean, if MAC addresses were 256 bits, then this would be a non-issue because you could never loop through.
But they aren't.
What's that?
Fair enough, but they aren't.
Yeah, but there's something to consider there is even if the MAC addresses were that long, it's the MAC address is a common thing that's put out there in the public, especially with logs and syslogs and that kind of stuff. Anyone who prints out a secure key in a log file or anything like that is going to be asking for trouble. So the only real way...
But it'd be a totally different issue than what we're talking about here, which is that you can use a redirection service to find all SNOME 300 phones that have ever existed and where they're provisioned from and what that provisioning information is.
Yeah, the redirection service just makes it so much easier to find the devices.
Yeah.
Right.
The fact, and then you come down to, I mean, redirection services should never be implemented, obviously, without securely encrypted configs that only the phone can read, or else they're horribly vulnerable. And the fact that I've seen some redirection services that allow you to specify the credentials.
Did we lose Mike? Or did I lose?
No, he's still there. He's kind of going in and out a little bit.
All right, I'm sorry. I mean, I've seen some of these redirection services that allow you to specify the credentials, but you can, without credentials, pull that information. That's just terrifying. The best way to make sure that your provisioning secure is at the network layers. Make sure that only trusted sources can pull provision in the first place. And from there, obviously, secure provisioning is the next best thing, and that needs to be an actual key-based secure provisioning where you have an individual key, that's specific to each phone. Some of that's going to require vendor support to actually get factory installed keys on those phones, so you can do that. It does leave us with a big problem of millions of phones out in the field with no way to address the problem.
Well, I mean, that's not quite that doom and gloom. Like, if you wanted to take action today, what you would do, even if you were using the secure provisioning, is you'd say, okay, well, let's hope that nobody's exploiting us right now. And then what you do is you flash provisioning out to all your phones, changing their credentials, and you also send out to them a key to decrypt your encrypted provisioning, or you turn on HTTPS and you send down to the phone a username and password. Right?
I'm not actually that concerned about first-time provisioning being in the clear, because as long as you can only do it once, the attack vector is fairly small.
Right.
Hopefully, an initial provisioning, that device doesn't have permission to do calls until it's actually fully provisioned. That would be kind of how we work on our stuff. So I actually think the attack vector is fairly narrow in that regard. Also, the discussion with the IVR is really interesting. You could take, when a phone comes in with insecure provisioning for the initial provision, you could provision it in such a way that it has a specific set of credentials, as well as information to go back and get secure stuff, and then set the phone up to only be able to call an IVR that requires you to enter via DTMF some authentication credentials. You do that, and then reboot the phone, have it pull new provisioning securely now that you've validated that there's an authorized party on the other end of the phone. I mean, that's a method that you could do even with what you have today, that could allow pretty secure things. I mean, we're not concerned about man-in-the-middle attacks on the provisioning authentication. I'm sure they're going on out there, but that's not how these phones are being owned. They're being owned by configs that you can just pull and clear, and being able to pull the settings directly off the phones. That's another thing.
Yes.
Everyone.
The latter one is the one that we've seen more of.
Disable the web interfaces on your phones, please.
Yes. Yes. It's silly that those are on by default. It's completely silly that those are turned on by default.
We can't stop selling the place of fruit because people want to eat the fruit. It's totally true. That's how RPS systems came out. Customers want to just be able to plug their phone in. And there's lots of tricks to do that, but they depend on DHCP setting all right, or a box on that subnet and things like that. And those are great tricks, and we use them. But if you want to ship a phone to a remote user, Bobby CEO wants his new shiny happy phone, and you want to remote order it from the distributor, get the MAC address for them, put it in your provisioning system, and have them just plug it in at home and have it work. That's a really nice feature. Customers like that. And it's not practical for a vendor to pull a phone out of the box and type in a provisioning address, but it's really practical for them in their order system to throw a database entry in that has a provisioning redirect URL.
It's also worth mentioning that I'm surprised when they were doing the hardware designs for these that they didn't take into consideration they could have just put a small AES or RSA module inside. I mean, those things are dirt cheap these days. Maybe not direct from RSA themselves, but some of the smaller competitors, you can get them for like dongles themselves are $10, So I'm sure that a small module
I
works
don't understand
alongside
exactly
it.
what you're saying.
Okay,
Most phones do provide. Do, for example, HTTPS, like SNUMs.
No. So let me
right?
clarify. So if you had an AES module, you could basically that was only shared, with where the other the other part of the key was only shared with your provider or with the vendor, you could then generate these requests, putting in a non-replayable one-time hash with each request that will make it so the vendor and the provider knows that the request is coming from that real phone, and it's something that you couldn't extract the secret key from the module without going and actually tinkering with the hardware. You wouldn't be able to do it, even if you break out the sandbox. Unless or you'd root the phone, I guess, or put malware on there. But nevertheless, it means that the vendor and provider would have the ability to verify that the request is coming from that phone. It's not about encrypting the traffic; it's about establishing a known identity, and that's just basic.
You're not talking about an AES module. You're talking about a TPM module. You want a trusted computing module on the phone.
You're quite right. Sorry, yeah.
You're right. I mean, that would be great. I think it's probably overkill. I'm surprised they didn't go with a much easier solution, a much more straightforward solution, like I would expect out of a standards committee. A straightforward solution to the problem would be that on first boot, the phone comes up and says, please enter the string, please enter the digits provided by your provider. And then you as the provider send them a 16-digit string, the same length as a credit card, right? Or something of that order of magnitude, which would be plenty enough in this situation. It has about, I don't know, 16 bits has over 50 bits of entropy.
But however, if you think of it like this, the only way to make that secure is if the auto provisioning is one time, that code is one-time use, and even if it is one-time use, you have to make it significantly long enough and complex enough that it can't be brute forced, because otherwise people would just be hitting those URLs all day long. And that is, if you've got a customer that's just received a shipment of 20 phones, that's going to be a huge headache for them, and it completely goes against the marketing model of zero touch.
Yeah, that's true. But on the other side, if you put in a TPM, now you've got complication on the other side. Is that now you have to track those public key components all the way through the inventory chain, which is pain, and why nobody does it that way either.
I think underwood saying most new industrial ARMs are getting a TPM-like module. Are most of these phones ARMs, or I know the U-Links are MIPS? What's the architecture look like on other devices?
This is really popular on all of the internal phones. I've seen a couple of new phones, the Fuso side, that are ARM-based, but the vast majority of them are MIPS-based.
So I think the Polycom VVXs are those MIPS, or they seem like they probably are to me.
I haven't checked the VVXs, but I know the older ones.
Yeah, I know the older ones. I know about that.
And hopefully from this talk, maybe this will get the vendors to start listening and the providers to start listening, and it will trigger people, or the developers in those companies to start redoing the design of this model, because it's a flawed model which you can reduce the attack vector at best and slow it down, but there isn't going to be a 100% protection really. So hopefully something will be done.
Well, I think the challenge with regard to people taking action on this is that everyone already knows it's a problem. I mean, the problem here is that there's no surprise. I mean, I don't know if anyone on this call is surprised, but the vendors certainly aren't. This isn't one of those things where you dig into a firmware and you're like, oh, they forgot to for a null pointer. And then you're able to craft some buffer overflow that takes over the phone. No.
Well, this is an architected solution.
This is insecure by design. I mean,
exactly.
Everyone who was designing this knew that it was fundamentally flawed. Everyone who's looked at this for more than 5 or 10 seconds knows that it's insecure.
Well, maybe they
so-
didn't. Maybe that person who initially designed it and some of the people involved were genuinely incompetent. And I'm going to add on here, at least one of the companies in the UK that I've had to deal with, I can say is 100% incompetent, definitely, and their developers do not know what the fuck they are doing. Never assume that people know what they're doing, because you can tell it infuriates me. It really does.
Carl, I'll tell you, we had a serious a couple serious fraud events, and they occurred because of the Samsung phone system. And so if you or anyone you know has a Samsung phone system, I highly encourage you to be very, very careful.
Okay.
I'll say
a couple customers of ours did, and here's the thing. So the resellers, the people who program these, we don't touch them, but we have resellers who do. They have this management console or whatever that they use to log in and make changes to the database on the phone. And so, you set a password on this. So all the good resellers out there, they change the password to this management console. But, and here's the but, the system is also accessible over Telnet and FTP. And, as if that were not bad enough, the password that you set on this management console does not change the password for Telnet and FTP. And in fact, there is no way in the system whatsoever to change the password for Telnet and FTP. And let's make this even better. The password is documented in all of the Samsung materials. If anyone out there is curious, it is admin.
How else would you know what the password is?
Right? So the username is admin, the password is Samsung. And so they tell you how to log into FTP and Telnet using these things. And it's a Linux system. It runs Linux 2.6.12, I think. And via Telnet, it drops you right into a root shell.
What?
And their documentation encourages you to port forward to FTP and Telnet to these boxes. So you are encouraged to open these ports to the internet so that you can remotely manage the system.
So you can remotely root your phone system?
Yes.
Oh, God.
Wow.
That's awesome. The most recent fraud incident that I saw had to do with a remote network that was owned, and the hacker actually using the phone UI that was enabled to gather credentials and use them. And more interestingly, and this was actually kind of strange, the fraudulent traffic was tunneled through the remotely owned network. So it was coming from the same IP that the phone was registered from.
Wow.
Which I've never seen before. They were pretty...
Were they using... I mean, were they using the phone itself? Like, were they translating calls through the phone? Or?
Not the phone itself, because there was 30 to 50 calls up at the same time.
So they had to own the network and set up forward.
The local network was owned and forwarding was set up. This customer was lucky other fraud identification systems caught it quickly, but certainly we've seen phones getting owned through the web interfaces. That's why I said, please disable your web interfaces. Have a way to turn them on momentarily to do what you have to do and turn them back off, but don't leave them on. It's just a huge attack vector. A lot of vendors still let you read the credentials, the passwords via the web interface instead of returning nothing. Or worse, the interface won't actually display it, but when you actually look at the data, it's in the freaking HTML DOM. And you can pull it out. Which is worse, because you think it's fine, and it's really just the type of the field is a password text box. So,
and on that note, just a heads up, there are actually a couple of phone providers that when you load the private AES key onto the phone, they do display that key in the phone UI.
In the web interface, so you think you're secure. So if you leave the web interface open, someone just needs to guess the password, which is usually something default, and get right in and read your keys. And
that's how the Sephora phones work. Is that the way that you store a key on that to read the encrypted AES provisioning files? The key is right there in the web interface. You can just pull it out of the web interface if you have the web interface enabled.
Some phones have other interfaces too, but the web interface are frequently owned. That, and when you provision phones, no matter what, change the default passwords that are shipped from the vendor. I mean, at least it's a different default that someone has to go look at instead of their scanner just looking up, you know, I see a Ulink phone here, I'm going to try, I don't even know what it is for Ulink.
PSIP. I'm sorry, that's Polycom.
Polycom, what, 456 or something?
Yeah, theirs is they have a default username and password, but on the phone it's like 456. I want to say there's like 1, 2, 3, and 4, 5, 6 by default on the Polycom, and then it's like SPIP in Polycom or something like that for the default FTP and provisioning server passwords. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. So, I mean, there's a lot of stuff like that that goes on out there. So, while we can, does anybody else have any questions for the Coup-de-Tel team or Cal before we start winding this thing down? All right. Well, I want to say thanks to Cal for coming in and joining us today. I'm going to go ahead and wrap up the recording here, and so we can get this thing posted on YouTube for everybody else to come out. Cal was gracious enough to give us an exclusive here on ClueCon Weekly, so thanks very much for that, Cal.
No problem.
If you guys want to see in touch, just come on back around for ClueCon Weekly. We'll always have fun stuff like this, and find out what we're going to break next week. Again, this is Ken for ClueCon Weekly for the Free Switch team and for ClueCon.com. Come on back and join us again sometime. Thank you, guys.